He expressed his feelings to an alien woman. Her answer changed everything. The city of Nova Solace was alive in a way that no human city ever truly was it. Breathed in waves of neon, light its skyline pulsing like a living organism fed by rivers of hovercrafts, and the endless hum of interstellar commerce towers of glass and metal stretched toward the sky like the fingers of a forgotten god, their surfaces reflecting the distant glow of orbital stations. Below, amidst the flowing crowds of humans, xenos, and beings that defied classification, a single man stood still, transfixed. Ethan Mercer had always considered himself a logical man, a scientist, a man of measured thought and rational deduction, which is why it was incredibly inconvenient that for the past 3 weeks he had spent an embarrassing amount of time staring at a woman he absolutely should not have been staring at. She was, for lack of a better term, otherworldly, tall, poised, and elegant in ways that made the human definition of the word seem insufficient. She moved through the crowds of Nova Solace with an effortless grace, as if the city adjusted itself around her rather than the other way around. Her skin was a shade that seemed to shift under the city lights, at times luminous gold, at others a deep burnish bronze. Her eyes, bright and piercing, reflected the glow of the city like twin nebulae caught in motion, and of course her ears, long pointed and swept back elegantly, they flickered almost imperceptibly when she was deep in thought, an anatomical quirk that Ethan had found far more fascinating than was probably appropriate. He had once spent an entire lunch break trying to determine if they had additional musculature for expressiveness or if it was simply an involuntary response. Either way, it was adorable, and that was a problem because this woman, this alien, was not just some stranger in a cafe or a passenger on the same transit line. She was a scientist, a highly intelligent, highly respected scientist working with the United Galactic Research Initiative, a coalition of species dedicated to the advancement of interstellar knowledge, which meant she was at best a potential colleague, and at worst a terrifyingly advanced telepathic being who could probably hear every single dumb, awkward thought Ethan had about her. And yet, despite knowing how utterly idiotic it was, here he was starring again. He sighed and muttered under his breath, "Smooth, Mercer, real smooth." He was just about to finally tear his gaze away when, to his horror, she turned and looked directly at him. Panic, immediate visceral panic. Ethan scrambled to recover his brain, firing off emergency escape plans. He could pretend to be looking at something behind her. Maybe he could act like he was deep in thought, contemplating the meaning of existence, instead of, say, the elegant curve of her ears, or he could just run, find a nice corner of the universe to live in as a hermit, and never have to confront this moment again. Unfortunately, before he could enact any of these brilliant plans, she tilted her head ever so slightly, studying him with an expression that made his skin prickle. And then he did something he would regret for the rest of his natural life. He spoke. "I admire you every day, do you know that?" Silence, the words hung in the air between them, suspended like a ship caught between gravitational forces. He immediately wanted to implode. There were 1,000 better ways he could have phrased that, 1,000 better times to say it, and yet this was what his brain had chosen. Why her gaze did not waver. She did not smile, did not blush, did not react with the bused amusement of a human woman encountering a socially incompetent man. Instead, she simply looked at him, her eyes locked onto his with unsettling clarity, and then she said something that destroyed him completely. "I have always known." His entire existence derailed in that moment. "You." Ethan's voice cracked. He coughed violently to cover it. "I'm sorry." What? Her lips curved ever so slightly, but it was not a smirk, not mockery, more like understanding. "You admire me," she said again, as if repeating an objective fact. "You observe me every day. I have always known." Ethan forgot how to function. His brain, once a proud bastion of scientific reasoning, was melting into a puddle of existential horror and shame. Forced out a laugh. "Wow, okay, that's wow. You sure? Because I feel like maybe you're overestimating how much you wonder if my ears are an evolutionary trait or an aesthetic modification." She interrupted, her voice smooth as liquid silver. "You have theorized about their musculature on 3 separate occasions." Ethan nearly choked on his own soul. She continued, Unbothered, you find my vocal cadence unusually melodic and have speculated that my species evolved with a natural harmonic resonance. His knees threatened. Mutiny, you once debated with yourself for a full 8 minutes whether I was taller than the average human female, or if my posture simply made me appear so. Ethan's mouth opened then closed then. Opened again, his spirit ascended from his body. She leaned in slightly, and for the first time he caught a glimpse of genuine amusement flickering in her expression. You also believe my presence is otherworldly, and that I move as if the city adjusts itself around me, which I must say is rather poetic for a scientist. Ethan wanted to die. This is a nightmare, he whispered. It is not, she assured him, her voice almost gentle. But I understand why you might think so. And then, in the most unexpected turn of events in the history of the entire universe, she laughed. It was soft at first, a ripple of sound, and then it grew a warm, genuine laugh that made the impossible weight of his mortification feel just a little lighter. For all the ways her species was different, for all the ways she seemed beyond comprehension, at least one thing remained comfortingly universal: she had a damn good sense of humor. Novazalis had absolutely no business being this bright at night. Ethan wasn't sure if it was the neon skyline, the glowing advertisements projected into midair, or the unfortunate fact that he was currently experiencing the worst secondhand embarrassment of his life, but everything seemed too sharp, too loud, too much. He needed a drink. Unfortunately, that would require walking past the actual alien goddess who had just casually informed him that she had been fully aware of his awkward admiration from the very beginning, which was in itself an atrocity against the concept of privacy. He had spent years assuming that his thoughts were his own, but no, apparently this was not the case. Apparently the universe had decided that Ethan Mercer, professional scientist and renowned overthinker, should be mentally transparent to a member of a species with telepathic group consciousness. Fantastic, he exhaled, forcing his brain to reboot. Think Mercer, damage control, you can fix this, except he absolutely could not, because she was still looking at him with amused curiosity, and his feet had completely betrayed him, refusing to move in literally any direction. So instead he did what any self-respecting man would do: he committed to the disaster. So he said, folding his arms and trying very hard to look like someone who had not just been existentially humiliated. When you say you've always known, her lips twitched. Yes, Ethan hesitated. Do you mean literally always, like since we met, or are we talking a horrifying retroactive, all-knowing kind of situation? She tilted her head, those damn fascinating ears flicking slightly, which was very distracting and extremely unfair. I became aware of your thoughts the moment our minds brushed for the first time, she said, as if this was a completely normal thing to say. Ethan's entire body locked up. Wait, hold on, back up, brushed. She gave a slow nod. Yes, our minds touched briefly when we first encountered one another in the research atrium. I was introducing myself to your colleagues. You were standing at the far end of the room, considering whether I was taller than average. Ethan actively had to suppress the urge to scream into the sky. I was just curious. I know, she said, entirely too pleased with herself. That's how I knew. He rubbed his face with both hands, willing himself to evaporate into the atmosphere. You mean to tell me that a single passing thought was enough for you to what? Hack into my brain, steal my browser history, read my entire psychological profile? Her eyes gleamed with something deeply unfair. I would never invade your privacy. Ethan dropped his hands, staring at her. You literally just said you've been living in my head rent-free for weeks. She exhaled through her nose, the alien equivalent of a very patient sigh. I do not enter your thoughts intentionally, Ethan. Your emotions and impressions simply resonate through the network. Your species is not connected as we are, so you do not project as loudly, but when someone's focus is sustained, when they direct their attention toward one of us for long periods, her voice softened, her expression shifting into something entirely too calm for the current situation. We feel it, it becomes part of us. Ethan didn't like the way she said that, like it wasn't just an ability, like it was personal. He swallowed, trying very hard not to think about the million tiny moments of admiration he'd had for her every time he'd watched her work, fascinated by her grace every time he'd wondered what her home world looked like, every time he'd caught a flicker of a smile on her lips and thought, oh no. His stomach dropped. You, he pointed at Her as if that would make any of this less horrifying. You felt everything her. Silence was devastating. Ethan made a noise that could only be described as the sound of a man realizing he has no control over his own life. Okay, he said, packing now because that was the only thing keeping him from just collapsing into a heap of pure mortification. This is bad, this is so much worse than I thought. She blinked. Why? He turned, gesturing wildly. Because if what you're saying is true, then that means you didn't just know that I found you interesting, you didn't just know that I admired you. He froze, his entire body went stiff. The memories hit him all at once, a highlight reel of every single dumbass moment that had ever existed inside his mind. The time he'd walked past her in the corridor and thought, if I ever had to be interrogated by an alien, I hope it's her. The time he saw her adjusting some complex research equipment and thought I would watch an entire documentary of her doing that. The time he'd convinced himself her voice definitely had some kind of scientifically engineered resonance only to then think, or maybe I'm just an idiot. And worst of all, the time he'd spent 4 consecutive minutes wondering what her ears felt like. Dear God, Ethan let out a broken wheeze. No, we're going to pretend this never happened. I'm going to walk that way. You're going to forget I exist, and we're going to move on with our lives. She was smiling now, which was so rude that seems unnecessary. Ethan gave a wild laugh. I assure you it is entirely necessary. Why? Because he flailed, am a scientist. I'm a man of logic and dignity and intellectual rigor. She tilted her head. You are also a man who once spent an hour trying to figure out if I float when I walk. That was a one-time thing. I know. Ethan died on the spot. She watched him with that same amused serenity, her hands clasped lightly behind her back, completely unaffected by his absolute mental collapse. Then after a moment she said, if it is any consolation, I have found your thoughts pleasant. Ethan stopped packing. He turned slowly, suspiciously. Plays, he repeated. She gave a small, enigmatic nod. Yes, and just like that the entire balance of power shifted. Ethan Mercer was experiencing a crisis of unprecedented proportions. He wasn't being chased by rogue AI, he wasn't stranded in deep space, he wasn't even being held hostage by an intergalactic warlord demanding the secrets of humanity's greatest weapon. His crisis was far worse because standing in front of him in the bustling heart of Nova Solace was a stunningly intelligent, breathtakingly elegant alien woman who had just casually informed him that she found his thoughts pleasant, his thoughts which were by any reasonable standard an absolute mess of overanalysis, awkward admiration, and at least one extensive internal debate about whether she had extra sensory receptors in her ears were somehow not a source of deep discomfort to her. No, apparently she liked them. This was not in his calculations. Okay, Ethan said, pinching the bridge of his nose, because if he didn't anchor himself to something, he was going to float away into the void. So just to clarify, you've known about my completely normal and respectful observations this whole time, and you're okay with it. She regarded him with the same calm, unreadable expression she always had, except now he was starting to suspect something deeply disturbing. She was enjoying this. I would not say okay with it, she said smoothly. That phrase implies tolerance, as if I were enduring something unpleasant. That is not the case. Ethan's mouth felt weirdly dry. Right, so you're saying I find your thoughts, she said, pausing deliberately. Endearing. Ethan's soul temporarily exited his body. Endearing, he echoed weakly, like a stray cat that keeps showing up at your doorstep, or more like an ongoing science experiment where you're watching to see when I finally combust from embarrassment. Her lips curved. Both are interesting metaphors. I don't like how you didn't answer the question. I know this woman was going to be the death of him. Ethan exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair as he attempted to reassemble what remained of his dignity. He had already publicly humiliated himself, so at this point he might as well just lean into the catastrophe. So he said, shifting his weight, what exactly does pleasant mean in your context? Because I feel like there's a wide spectrum here. Are we talking nice background music while you work, pleasant, or surprisingly good dessert you didn't expect to like? Pleasant, she made a soft sound, a quiet hum, as if genuinely considering it. You are not background noise, she said. You are engaging. Ethan Blinked I am, she nodded. Your thoughts have a certain, she paused, searching for the right word, unfiltered curiosity. It is rare among humans, Ethan snorted. You mean it's rare for someone to obsessively wonder about how your ears work? Her head tilted slightly, and damn it all, he could see her ears flick again. I meant, she said, that it is rare for someone to wonder without fear. That stopped him short. What do you mean? He asked, frowning slightly. She studied him, her expression momentarily unreadable. The city lights flickered across her face, illuminating the delicate golden hues of her skin, the sharp yet elegant angles of her features. Most humans hesitate around me, she said finally. They either tread carefully, fearing offense, or they regard me with silent fascination, never daring to ask. You do neither. Ethan blinked. Well, yeah, but that's because I'm an idiot, she exhaled, in something alarmingly close to a laugh perhaps, but an honest idiot. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That feels like an insult. Not at all, she said smoothly. Honesty is valuable. Well, in that case, let me be very honest right now, Ethan said, gesturing at her. You are deeply unsettling. She raised an elegant brow. Oh yes, because you just told me with a completely straight face that you've had direct access to my thoughts for weeks, and instead of being horrified, you think I'm endearing. That is highly suspicious. Her lips twitched. Why? Because I know what my thoughts are like, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. They are not coherent, they are not well organized, and they are definitely not the kind of thoughts that should be enjoyed by a hyper-intelligent alien being. She tilted her head slightly, and for some reason that one small movement sent a shiver down his spine. Perhaps, she mused, I find the chaos refreshing. Ethan physically recoiled. I'm accustomed to structured thoughts, she said, folding her hands behind her back. The minds of my kind are interconnected, our ideas flowing between us with clarity and precision. There is rarely disorder, rarely unpredictability. Ethan narrowed his eyes. So what you're saying is you've been reading my thoughts like an experimental novel where the plot makes absolutely no sense, and that's entertaining for you? A soft, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Something like that. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then finally he just groaned into his hands. Unbelievable, he muttered. I am literally a mental sitcom for an advanced alien species. This is my legacy. She laughed then, and Ethan, who was still reeling from the absolute disaster that was his existence, found himself momentarily frozen, because the laugh was not what he expected. It wasn't cold or distant or perfectly measured like so many of her words had been. It was warm, rich, and genuinely amused, like someone who had just discovered something truly delightful for the first time, and for a reason he absolutely did not want to examine. Ethan felt something deep in his chest shift slightly. He exhaled hard. Okay, he muttered, if you're going to be reading my thoughts forever, you at least owe me a name. She regarded him for a long moment before answering. My name is Leyen. Ethan tried it out in his head. Leyen, it fit her, elegant, smooth, and slightly mysterious. Well, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I guess if you already live in my head, we might as well get properly introduced. Leyen's eyes gleamed. Indeed, Nova Solis never really slept. The city was a sprawling technological marvel, bathed in luminescent holograms and hovercraft traffic, with glowing advertisements shimmering across the skyline like sentient constellations. It was the kind of place that didn't care whether it was day or night. It was always awake, always moving, always humming, with the pulse of something just slightly too advanced for the human brain to fully process. And Ethan Mercer, self-respecting scientist and world-class disaster, was currently sitting on a floating bar stool in one of its many orbit lounges, trying very hard to process the fact that his brain was now shared intellectual property across from him, perched on the opposite floating bar stool with the grace of someone who had never in her life experienced clumsiness. Leyen took a sip of something that definitely looked too blue to be safe. Ethan watched her, suspicion narrowing his eyes. That's not toxic to humans, is it? He asked, nodding toward her drink. She raised a single elegant brow. Would you like to find out? Ethan leaned back. Absolutely not. I still have vivid nightmares about the last time I trusted alien beverages. Leyen tilted her head, her ears flicking slightly in silent amusement. The incident with the Kavari nectar. Ethan pointed at her. Exactly. It was supposed to taste like fruit. Instead, it tasted like a live electrical current mixed with regret. Leyen's lips Twitched, he drank an entire glass. Ethan threw up his hands. It was a cultural misunderstanding. The bartender, a floating drone with a glowing interface, and the words, "happy to serve," flickering across its display word past them, scanning Ethan's face. "Do you require refreshment, human?" It chirped. Ethan glanced at Leon's mystery beverage, then back at the robot. "You got anything that won't make me hallucinate?" The drone's display blinked. "Query how many hallucinations are acceptable?" Ethan turned back to Lion. "I hate that it asked me that." Lion simply smiled into her glass, taking another sip. After a moment of contemplating his own mortality, Ethan sighed and waved the drone off. "You know what, I'll just take a water." The drone buzzed happily, dispensed a suspiciously glowing cup of liquid, and zipped away. Ethan frowned at it. This better not be sentient. Lion's gaze was entirely too entertained as she watched him poke at the glass with great skepticism. "I promise," she said, "if it tries to communicate, I will warn you." Ethan muttered something about the increasing lack of beverage safety in the galaxy, but ultimately took a cautious sip. Leon rested her elbows lightly on the bar, her gaze turning more thoughtful as she regarded him. "You seem less distressed than you were earlier." Ethan snorted into his glass. "Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm still completely unraveling internally. I've just reached the point where my brain has decided to coast on autopilot and hope for the best." Lion's lips curved. "Is that how you always operate?" "Listen, Lion," Ethan said, setting down his drink with a self-deprecating flourish. "My entire life is just a series of barely controlled experiments, and not making a complete fool of myself." Leon regarded him for a moment, then said without hesitation, "Your success rate is low." Ethan choked. "I cannot believe I willingly sit here and subject myself to this level of psychological warfare." Lion's eyes gleamed, and that was when it hit him. She was teasing him. She, a highly advanced alien with a mind like a collective supercomput, was choosing to humor herself at his expense, and honestly, he kind of respected it. "You no," Ethan said, leaning forward slightly. "If you were anyone else, I'd assume this was flirting." Lion's expression didn't change, which was why it was so unnerving. When she simply tilted her head and said, "Is it not?" Ethan's entire brain crashed. "No, see, that's," he gestured vaguely at her, at himself, at the incomprehensible weight of the cosmos pressing down on this ridiculous conversation. "That's not something you can just say with zero hesitation and expect me to be fine." Lion looked genuinely curious now. "Why not?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, attempting to sort through the absolute catastrophe of his emotions. Because I'm human. We are not built to process information like this without having a full-on existential meltdown." Lion sat her drink down with an alarming level of serenity. "Would you prefer I be dishonest?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then sighed dramatically. "No," he admitted, "but maybe soften the existential gut punches just a little." Leon gave him a long, considering look, then, as if graciously offering a diplomatic truce, she nodded. "I will take that into account." Ethan squinted at her. That felt very non-committal. Lion took another sip of her drink, completely ignoring his distress. Ethan rubbed his temples, exhaling deeply. "All right, fine," he said, fully accepting his fate. "Now, if we're doing this, I need some kind of reference guide. You got to tell me exactly how much of my brain you can access at any given moment." Leon tilted her head slightly, considering. "I do not read your thoughts directly. If that is your concern, it is more like an echo." Ethan frowned. "An echo?" She nodded. "Your emotions, impressions, and directed thoughts resonate within my awareness. I do not deliberately observe them, but I sense their presence." Ethan processed this. "Okay," he said, "so you're saying that if I hypothetically thought extremely loudly about something ridiculous, you'd pick up on it?" Lion's gaze was impenetrable. "You already do." Ethan pointed at her. That was uncalled for. Lion simply took another sip of her questionable beverage, her expression unreadable. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "All right, you know what, if you get to experience the full unhinged chaos of my brain, I should at least get one piece of exclusive information about you." Leon set down her glass, such as. Ethan thought for a moment, then smirked. "What's your weirdest habit?" Leon blinked for the first time in this entire exchange. She looked genuinely thrown off, and Ethan had never Been more smug in his life for the first time since meeting Lion. Ethan felt powerful. He sat back in his floating bar stool, arms crossed, watching with immense satisfaction as the hyper-intelligent alien woman in front of him momentarily struggled for an answer. This was historic, this was justice, this was him finally getting a win in a conversation where he had otherwise been absolutely steamrolled by revelations about his own mind. Lion, for her part, looked deeply contemplative, which meant he had actually caught her off guard. She was always composed, always several steps ahead, but right now she was hesitating. Ethan took a slow sip of his probably safe water, savoring the moment. Well, Lian finally exhaled, setting down her now empty glass with graceful precision. I am uncertain if you would find it strange. Oh, Lian, Ethan said, grinning. I absolutely will. She gave him a very deliberate look, as if debating whether to answer at all. Then, after a moment, she said, I sometimes listen to human music at incorrect tempos. Ethan blinked. He leaned forward slightly. You're going to have to run that one by me again. Lion folded her hands together, her expression deadpan. I take musical compositions and slow them down or speed them up. Occasionally, I remove certain instruments to hear what the piece would sound like in different tonal arrangements. Ethan stared at her. You remix songs in your head? Lurian nodded. Yes, like just for fun. Yes. Ethan squinted. Are you telling me that while I've been over here having existential breakdowns, you've just been mentally DJing the universe's most complicated mixtape? Lian gave him a look that was entirely too composed. It is a form of analysis. Ethan pointed at her number. It's a hobby. You're just trying to sound sophisticated about it. Lion did not deny this. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Okay. So what's your favorite musical abomination you've created? Lion tilted her head, slightly, considering. I once listened to your orchestral piece Moonlight Sonata, but at double the speed with the left-hand accompaniment removed. Ethan's soul momentarily left his body. You did what? It was interesting. Lion continued, entirely unfazed. The emotional weight shifted dramatically. It became less of a somber reflection and more of a frantic expression of urgency. Ethan looked physically pained. Lian, that is a crime. She raised an eyebrow. I was under the impression that human art was meant to be interpreted in multiple ways. Yes, but not like that. Ethan threw up his hands. That's like taking a tragic romance film and playing it backwards so it becomes a story about a resurrected lover slowly falling out of love and returning to single life. Lian appeared to think about this. That could be interesting. Ethan groaned into his hands. You are dangerous. Lian merely picked up her glass again, looking entirely pleased with herself. Ethan rubbed his temples, still processing the sheer chaos of what he just learned. Okay, but why do you do this? What's the point of mentally reconstructing entire symphonies like an intergalactic sound engineer? Lian tapped a slender finger against the bar. You misunderstand. I do not merely alter human music. Ethan frowned, then Lion's gaze turned slightly amused. I do this with everything. Ethan blinked, then stared at her in slow, dawning horror. Lion, he said, voice cautious, are you telling me that you just randomly restructure reality in your head for fun? Lion took a delicate sip of her drink. Yes. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then pointed aggressively. That is not normal. Lion's expression was infuriatingly serene. For my species it is. Ethan slumped against the bar, letting his head fall forward with a dramatic sigh. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Here, I am just trying to survive life with basic human logic, and you're over here treating the laws of existence like a fun little thought experiment. Lyrian's lips curved. Would you like an example? Ethan groaned. Number, but I know you're going to give me one anyway. Lion leaned forward, slightly lowering her voice as if sharing a secret conspiracy. Right now I am considering what this conversation would be like if we had met in a completely different timeline. Ethan squinted. Like a different era? Lian nodded. Perhaps we met centuries ago when humans still relied on steam and gears rather than circuits and energy fields, or perhaps we met in a distant future where the roles of our species are reversed, where humanity has the vast interconnected mind and I am merely a solitary traveler observing it. Ethan exhaled. So basically, you just rewrite history and physics in your brain like a high-budget sci-fi reboot? Lian tilted Her head is that not what you humans call imagination. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That sounds suspiciously close to something I'd say. Lion's expression remained unreadable, but her eyes glimmered with something close to amusement. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. I can't believe this. My entire species struggles to use 10% of their brains, and here you are running full theoretical multiverse simulations just because you're bored. Lian gave a small, knowing smile. That is one way to put it. Ethan leaned back in defeat, shaking his head. All right, fine, you win. You are officially the weirdest person I have ever met. Lion inclined her head slightly. Thank you, that was not a compliment. Lion took another sip of her drink. Ethan groaned, rubbing his face. I swear if you tell me you've been reconstructing this entire conversation in alternate versions in real time, I'm leaving. Lian did not answer immediately. Ethan froze. He slowly lowered his hands, narrowing his eyes. Lion set her glass down. Hypothetically, no. Ethan stood up, hands in the air. I refuse. I am done. I am leaving. Lion's laugh, soft and smooth, followed him as he dramatically walked away, and despite himself, Ethan found himself grinning. Ethan Mercer had officially run out of ways to process his life. It wasn't just the intergalactic city humming with technology beyond his understanding. It wasn't the fact that his brain was now some kind of open broadcasting signal. For Lyrian's species, it wasn't even the existential horror of learning that she mentally remixed reality like a cosmic DJ whenever she got bored. No, the real problem was that he was starting to enjoy it, and that was deeply concerning. Ethan had always considered himself a man of science and logic. He was a researcher, a thinker, someone who approached the universe with a healthy level of skepticism and caffeine addiction, but now he was sitting in a hovering tram speeding through Nova Sololis' neon-lit skyline next to an alien woman with unnervingly long ears, trying to figure out how his entire reality had turned into an absurdist fever dream. Lion, of course, looked perfectly at ease. I assume, she said smoothly, not even looking at him, that you have many thoughts right now. Ethan dragged a hand down his face. Lion, I always have many thoughts. You're just aware of them now. Lian inclined her head slightly, her ears flicking in mild amusement. That is true. Ethan squinted at her. Are you enjoying this? She considered. You are a fascinating specimen. Ethan groaned. That is absolutely the most demeaning way you could have phrased that. Lian did not deny it. The tram hummed softly as it carried them across the city, weaving through shimmering towers of glass and energy. Ethan glanced out the window, watching the sky shift from a deep twilight blue to the pulsing glow of artificial stars. Somewhere in the distance, a massive digital billboard projected an advertisement for Interstellar vacations featuring a holographic dolphin wearing sunglasses. He sighed. This city is ridiculous. Lian followed his gaze. Humans have a penchant for excess. Ethan scoffed. Says the species that casually redesigns the fundamental laws of reality in their free time. Lion's lips twitched. Would you prefer I did not? Ethan exhaled. Honestly, I don't even know anymore. The tram slowed as they approached a station suspended over a massive spiraling plaza filled with floating platforms and glowing walkways. Ethan peered out the window, frowning. Wait, where are we going again? Lion stood as the tram came to a smooth stop. To a gathering. Ethan hesitated. Gathering. Lian stepped onto the platform, turning back toward him. A social event. Ethan blinked. Are you taking me to a party? Lian didn't answer, which was deeply concerning. Ethan stepped off the tram, glancing around at the surprisingly large crowd milling about the plaza. The people here were an eclectic mix of species, some humanoid, some definitely not all moving with an air of casual elegance and advanced fashion choices that made him feel aggressively underdressed. He turned to Lyrian, crossing his arms. All right, level with me. What kind of event is this? Lian looked unbothered. It is an intellectual symposium. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That sounds suspiciously like something I'd be into. Lian tilted her head slightly. That was the intention. Ethan paused. Wait. Are you saying you brought me here because you thought I'd like it? Lion's expression remained neutral. You do enjoy intellectual discourse. Ethan stared at her. Lion Salari, the most infuriatingly enigmatic being he had ever met, had against all odds actually taken his interests into account. That was deeply unsettling. Is this a trap? He asked, squinting. Lion sighed. Ethan, no. Seriously, Ethan gestured at the high-tech symposium because this is suspiciously well targeted. Lion gave him a pointed look. Would you prefer I take you somewhere you dislike? Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed. No. Lian turned gracefully, heading toward the event hall, and after a very brief moment of self-pity, Ethan followed. The building itself was impossibly sleek. All curved architecture and smooth metallic surfaces, its entrance flanked by floating energy sculptures that shimmered like living fire. Inside, the air was filled with a low hum of conversation and the occasional flicker of holographic data displays. Ethan took a slow breath. Okay. He could handle this probably. Lyrian led him deeper into the venue where a group of clearly intellectual types had gathered around a central podium. A tall, insectoid alien was currently gesturing toward a floating 3D projection of what looked like a collapsing star, while a mixed audience of humans, cyborgs, and beings Ethan couldn't even begin to categorize listened with polite interest. Ethan whistled. All right, I'll admit it, this is kind of cool. Lyron's eyes glimmered. I assumed you would say that. Ethan shook his head, muttering, of course you did. The discussion began, and despite himself, Ethan was fascinated. The theories being presented were beyond anything he had encountered before. Concepts of multidimensional gravitation, quantum information transfer, and the possibility of sentient singularities. At one point, a cyborg researcher proposed an equation that seemed to suggest that black holes might actually be biological entities. Ethan leaned over to Lian. Okay, I know I'm supposed to be keeping an open mind, but that just sounds like cosmic horror waiting to happen. Lian sipped her drink. It is a valid hypothesis. Ethan stared. Are you telling me you believe in space monsters? Lian gave him a completely unreadable expression. Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh my god, you do? Lian took another sip, saying nothing. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This is unacceptable. I was already struggling with the idea of my brain being on an open frequency. Now I got to worry about sentient black holes. Lian finally spoke, her voice calm and deliberate. You misunderstand. Ethan squinted. Oh. Lian looked at him directly. They do not merely exist, she said smoothly, they are listening. Ethan's entire soul left his body. Lian simply took another sip of her drink, and in that moment, for the first time in his life, Ethan regretted every single scientific curiosity he had ever indulged. Ethan Mercer had officially given up trying to be normal. It wasn't that he had ever been particularly remarkable before. He was just a human scientist working in a universe far too big for one brain to process, trying his best to make sense of things without spontaneously combusting from existential dread. But after everything, after meeting Lee and realizing his thoughts weren't his alone, learning that she casually reconstructed reality in her free time, and oh yeah, discovering that there might be sentient black holes listening in on the entire cosmos, he had finally accepted one undeniable truth. Normal was a lost cause. So fine, if he couldn't be normal, he'd at least be functional. Currently, that meant staring at Lion across a glowing table, trying very hard not to let her get into his head, which of course was impossible, but a man could dream. So, Ethan said, tapping his fingers on the surface, tell me again why we're sitting in what looks like an intergalactic sushi bar. Lian, who looked perfectly serene, took a sip of some suspiciously glowing beverage. Because you need closure. Ethan squinted. Do I? Yes. Ethan leaned forward. Are you just saying that because you can hear my subconscious screaming for answers? Lion's lips curved slightly. Yes. Ethan sighed. You are the worst. Lion took another slow sip of her drink. The bar around them was surprisingly cozy for a place floating over a gravitating city of neon lights and impossible architecture. Soft bioluminescent plants lined the edges of the room, casting a gentle glow over the booths. A holographic chef who looked like a very enthusiastic octopus in a tiny hat was assembling plates of food with what appeared to be both extreme skill and mild chaos. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right, fine, closure, let's do this. Lian set down her glass, watching him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. Very well, she said. What troubles you most? Ethan snorted. Do you want that alphabetically or in order of how much sleep I've lost? Lyron's expression remained calm, but her ears twitched slightly, an undeniable sign of mild amusement. Ethan sighed again. Okay, let's start with the obvious. My brain. How exactly does this whole Connected consciousness thing work? Am I just a radio station that you've permanently tuned into, or is there an off switch somewhere? Lian tilted her head. It is not so simple. While I can perceive your thoughts, I do not constantly experience them. It is more like an awareness that fluctuates depending on proximity and focus. Ethan frowned. So you mean when you're distracted I get privacy? Lian nodded. Ethan perked up instantly. Oh, thank God. I was beginning to worry you had a front row seat to every stupid thought I've ever had. Lian gave him a very deliberate look. Ethan froze. Lian, her lips curved slightly. I never said I wasn't aware of them before. Ethan's soul left his body for the second time that week. No, he held up a hand. Nope, we are not unpacking that. Lian took another slow sip of her drink, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Ethan groaned into his hands. All right, next question. Lian gestured for him to continue. He tapped the table. Why did you even care about all this? Lian raised an eyebrow. Clarify. Ethan exhaled, leaning back. I mean, you could have just let me go about my life completely oblivious. Why engage? Why share all of this with me? Lian considered him for a long moment. Then she said softly, because you were already searching for meaning. Ethan blinked. Lian's gaze didn't waver from the moment we met. You were looking outward. You were fascinated, curious, always reaching for answers beyond yourself. That is rare. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. I mean, I'm a scientist. It's my job to. Lian shook her head. Not all who study the universe truly wish to understand it. Ethan fell silent. Lian held his gaze, her expression unreadable. You are not afraid of questioning. That is why I told you the truth. Ethan swallowed for the first time. He wasn't entirely sure what to say. Lian let the moment settle before continuing. And now that you have the answers, what will you do with them? Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. Oh, no pressure, just the rest of my life, too. Think about that. Lian's lips twitched. You're not alone in it. Ethan glanced up at her. Lian simply watched him, eyes steady, and just for a moment Ethan believed her. Maybe he wasn't alone in this absurd, ever-expanding cosmos. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to figure everything out on his own. The thought was strangely comforting. Ethan huffed a small laugh. For an all-knowing alien, you're kind of a sap. Lian sipped her drink. That is entirely possible. Ethan shook his head, grinning despite himself. The octopus chef appeared, setting a plate of suspiciously glowing food in front of them with an excited wave of its tentacles. Ethan stared at the dish. Lian, yes, is this safe for human consumption? Lian looked at him thoughtfully. It is an acquired experience. Ethan groaned. That's not comforting at all. Lian picked up her utensil. Shall we find out together? Ethan sighed, shaking his head, then smiling just slightly, he picked up his fork. Maybe, just maybe, life wasn't meant to make perfect sense. Maybe it was just about finding the right people to experience the madness. The end.